There is no doubt that artificial intelligence is transformative, but the use of artificial intelligence in the commercial context carries substantial risk. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For the past 20 years, I've drafted and negotiated a variety of technology-related agreements and litigated technology disputes in courts across the country. So when you're analyzing the risks associated with utilizing artificial intelligence in a commercial context, I think you really got to conceptualize this in a variety of buckets. And the first bucket that you want to think about is really the operational risks associated with the technology itself. And what I mean by this is you're going to want to look at privacy and cybersecurity risks, particularly when personally identifiable information or personal information is going to be utilized in the context or with that artificial intelligence functionality. You're going to want to look at issues associated with cyber attacks, data poisoning, attacks on the training data that would potentially shift the outcomes. So to the forefront then, I think what becomes important is having an understanding of the risk mitigation efforts that the actual AI vendor itself has implemented. What are its protocols for security, for data security, and the like. All of that, you've really got to have a substantive understanding of what are the operational risks associated with the functionality itself. You need to have a fundamental understanding of the risks that are going to be presented by utilizing that training data. I mean, if the training data itself is not secure, how can you rely on the outcomes generated by the artificial intelligence functionality? How can you utilize them and have any confidence that they're actually going to be useful for whatever stated purpose you have with that software? You also want to conceptualize this with respect to external risks. You want to be able to mitigate risks in a changing legal and regulatory landscape. There's going to be, different AI laws and regulations that are going to come online. We've got kind of a patchwork quilt of AI regulation to some extent, around the world. You've got the EU, you've got some, US states that are attempting to regulate artificial intelligence. The regulatory landscape is unclear. And I think if you're going to make a real substantive push to use AI strategically in a way that's really important to your business, you're going to have to understand that there's going to be certain risks associated with regulations and legal requirements, and there may be even certain industry standards that are going to be applicable to your use of artificial intelligence that might be unique to your industry. The other way I think you want to conceptualize this is from an input and output perspective. You want to think about what data is being input into the system. And I think this really, you can look at it in a couple of different ways. One, what input has been utilized by the vendor to train that system? Where is it coming from? What risks are presented by the AI vendor's training in its use of whatever data. If it's an open model and the information is coming from the internet itself, that's a much different scenario than a closed environment where the data that model is being trained on is just from your company or your corporation. I mean, a much different risk profile that I think you need to take into consideration. You also want to have an understanding of what kind of data that you're putting into the system, what happens to that data as it moves through the artificial intelligence functionality. Is it going to be, where's it going to be stored, for example? Is it de-anonymized? Is it de-identified? What features, safety features is the artificial intelligence vendor putting in place to mitigate any risks associated with disclosing the data that you've put in there? You have to have some level of comfort that your data is not going to necessarily be utilized by your competitors. They're not going to have access to it, or the outputs that are being generated are going to be utilized by your competitor. All that needs to be disclosed on the front end so that there are no surprises on the back end. And then lastly, I think you want to conceptualize this really in the context of the outputs. What is the range of the output coming out of the AI tool? Does it incorporate third-party data? How is that data sourced? Some of these are similar to the inputs, but I think really, what is being generated, and what is that data that's being generated based on, and what are your rights to utilize that? Where is it coming from, and what risk does it pose? Are you going to be able to utilize that from an intellectual property perspective? Is there going to be an infringement associated with your use of that? Is somebody going to come after you because you're utilizing data that was generated from the AI tool? All of these things you have to have a fundamental understanding of in order to be able to mitigate any risk that's going to be presented by those. And you also want to think about, do I need some sort of substantive indemnity obligation from the AI vendor to protect me in the event that some of these things go sideways? And I think that's something that you really do need to consider, and you're going to want to have some serious conversations with your AI vendor in order to properly mitigate the risk. If you're negotiating or about to enter into an AI-related contract, or there's AI functionality embedded into your ERP software that you have questions about, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to help you with that and get you pointed in the right direction.